The vast majority of people think that criminal profiling involves only finding a criminal and arresting them. It's so much more than that. Criminal profiling involves not only a thorough investigation of the crime scene, but also a deep dive into the background of the victim and the criminal. The credibility for this comes from the fact that criminal profiling is a growing topic. A lot more people are looking into it to become their career path, and a lot more research is being done on its reliability. So in my speech, I will discuss where criminal profiling has come from, what creating a profile entails, and how it can be used, and the controversy surrounding it. Quote, criminal profiling dates back to the 1880s when two physicians used crime scene clues to predict the personality of the British serial killer Jack the Ripper, end quote. This was stated in my source called Criminal Profiling. Criminal profiling they'd use it to determine criminals and serial killers' next moves for over centuries. Before criminal profiling has been accepted, there was very little individualization in criminals being arrested and their punishments. In 1909, punishment made a turn towards this individualization, and criminal profiling started to emerge, bringing on the thought that causes of crime can be identifiable and could be discovered and studied. However, this started the years of controversy, and the rumors started to spread about criminal profiling. I will talk about this more later. The first case that drew attention to criminal profiling was in 1940 with the investigation of the Mad Bomber. This is when people really started to believe that criminal profiling could be used to find suspects that committed violent crimes. However, it, quote, became more frequent in the late 1970s with drug couriers and alien smuggling profiles, end quote, stated by Bernard Harcourt in his essay, The Shaping of Chance, about profiling at the turn of the century. Profiling was also used to target stop and frisk encounters with people who met a certain profiling criteria, and targeting suspects of misdemeanors. During this time, they had very little resources and knowledge, and criminal profiling was a very reactive kind of situation. So through the years, they've been trying to make it a more proactive situation, so you could find a criminal before they committed a crime. But we didn't use it to look at violent crimes. So as we move into the late 20th century and the early 21st century, we start to see it as what it is today. Today, profiling is used for many things. Some you might not even think about. An article looking at the past by Michael Higgins, he states, quote, it can be used as a security measure, by marketing research to predict your buying patterns, and even by TV providers to determine new programming, end quote. These might not be uses of criminal profiling, but they are uses of profiling. Criminal profiling can also be used in a lot of different ways. In the article Criminal Profiling, it states, quote, a geological approach uses patterns and locations to determine criminals. A typological approach assigns offenders to a specific category of criminals, and a clinical approach is used for crimes perpetrated by someone with a mental disorder, end quote. There are so many ways to create a profile or criminal profile, depending on what you want to achieve by creating one. So now let's look at the specific steps. The study by Anthony Pinizzotto and Norman Finkel, called A Personality Profile and an Outcome and Process Study, they describe the steps in a very detailed manner. So here is a general overview of them. The first step is to study the nature of the criminal act and the type of persons who have committed these kind of crimes in the past. The second is a thorough analysis of the crime scene and the clues left behind. Third is an examination of the background of not only the criminal, but also the victim. Fourth is the motivating factors, how these two people can be connected. And fifth is a description of the suspect using probable psychological makeup along with physical characteristics. So as you can see, there are a ton of steps involved in creating a criminal profile, which is why people get degrees to become a criminal profiler. It requires a lot of experience and a ton of time investigating in order to perform and create a proper criminal profile. So now that you know the steps, let's look at the uses and the uses by law enforcement. Before we move into the uses of criminal profiling in law enforcement, let's take a look at criminal profilers themselves and what else they can do. Criminal profilers work between organizations to help local and state law enforcement work together. Also giving detectives, quote, interrogation techniques or a profile of a suspect, end quote, as stated in the article, What is Criminal Profiling's Role in Law Enforcement? Since criminal profiling is a very up-and-coming topic and it is highly competitive, a lot of criminal profilers might not make it into the job they want. But with their degree, they can also go into criminal justice or forensic science. So now let's look at criminal profiling being used. The FBI uses criminal profiling for especially violent crimes. They train specific profilers to look at these violent crimes and they use, quote, technical training research and intelligence reports, end quote, from what is criminal profiling's role in law enforcement. To get to this level of criminal profiling, you need a bachelor's in science or a bachelor's in arts in criminal justice or psychology. Then 7 to 15 years of investigative experience, followed by a completion of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit training program. Then, after all these years of work, you get to work on-site, on-the-job training with an expert in the field and work on active cases. So now let's move into law enforcement's use of criminal profiling. To determine what crimes certain criminals would commit. Not only violent crimes like serial killers and murderers, but also burglars and arsonists. Also stated in what is criminal profile's role in law enforcement, criminal profiling is used in cases of, quote, hostage takers, rapists, sexual murders, and identifying writers of threatening letters, end quote. In this article, they also state, quote, by carefully studying patterns of behavior, profilers can formulate theories of what and how a criminal will act next, end quote. As you can see, there are many studies and situations where profiling can be life-saving, and also a lot of ways that profiling can be beneficial in an investigation. With all this, though, comes controversies and people questioning the reliability of profiling. Let's begin with an astounding fact and about the controversies of criminal profiling. A fact given by Torres, Boccianini, and Miller in their study, Perceptions of the Validity and Utility of Criminal Profiling Among Forensic Psychologists and Psychiatrists. Quote, 70% of police psychologists seriously question the validity of profiling work, end quote. These people were also reported to have participated in a significant amount of criminal profiling themselves. Many psychologists question the reliability of criminal profiling, even though profilers have been proven to create a more detailed report of the crime scene and the criminal, along with more correct predictions. They state, quote, fewer than half of the forensic mental health professionals felt profiling of criminal investigative analysis was reliable. Many of those people believe that profiling is more likely to hold up in court when it's called something else. Just like when the FBI used profiling back in 1992 and called it motivational analysis, which is the only reason it actually ended up holding up in court. Profiling has been called many things, such as, quote, behavioral evidence analysis, linkage analysis, signature analysis, and investigative analysis, end quote, listed by Torres, Boccianini, and Miller. Profiling hasn't been accepted or examined by mental health professionals, so law enforcement believes that there needs to be more research on it before they can continue their use. During Torres, Boccianini, and Miller's article, they also state, quote, participants who were asked to express their opinions on criminal investigative analysis expressed much better views. So a lot of people look at the name of it and change how they view it. Many people think of criminal profiling as a harsh term full of assumptions, which is not really the case. There needs to be a lot more research into this before we can fully understand it. Having heard my speech, I hope that you learned how criminal profiling came to be, what criminal profiling is, along with its uses in law enforcement and elsewhere, and some controversies with its reliability. With all this new information about criminal profiling, hopefully you have a better understanding of what criminal profiling is, and maybe you'll even look into it as a career path, or at least have more appreciation for those in the field. Thank you for listening.